All right, people. Welcome to another edition of Thunderdome. Welcome to Chapter 3, which is Unit 3. Take a look at this. Sensation and perception. Now read this. What if I told you you misread the top line? So if you read that, and you look up here and you say, right here, what I if told you, your brain changed that for you automatically, meaning that your brain does things for you, okay? It almost auto-corrects the world for you to see it in its most simple form, okay? That's an interesting thing for us to kind of end up knowing as a human, that our brain might not be as trustworthy as we think it is when viewing reality. That it does make things as simple as it possibly can, because that's what's going to probably increase our survival, right? So just know this going in, okay? All right. What is sensation and perception? Sensation is the process of detecting a physical stimulus such as light, sound, heat, pressure, all the raw data that enters your brain through sensory organs and receptors. Those are the senses. Now, we have more than just the 5 senses that we know about, but we'll get to those eventually. Perception is the process of integrating, organizing, and interpreting sensations. So how you interpret the raw data, genetics and environment shape this differently for every single one of us. I don't see the world like you see the world, right? I'm a 36-year-old man. I've lived in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s, and now gracing the wonderful 2020s. But I see the world a little bit different than you. My life experiences were different than you. I grew up without the internet, and then all of a sudden in 1995, boom, the internet hits. I see the world just a little bit differently than you do, or a lot differently than you do. My environment, my genetics, all of that is accounted for in those situations. So we don't see things as they are, we see them as we are. Here's an example of sensation and perception in a little painting. Okay, so your eye's physical response to light, splotches of color, and lines reflects sensation. If we looked at this picture just solely on sensation, we would probably name colors, maybe the shape, because we can do that. Our eyes pick up shapes, obviously. So, the shape, the size, all that kind of stuff. So sensationally, we pick those things up. So literally, light waves are coming off of this, into the back of your eye, and you are changing that raw data into information in your occipital lobe. So then we look at it through perception. So integrating and organizing those sensations so that you interpret the light, splotches of color, and lines as a painting, a flag, or some other object reflects perception. When you look at this, you're like, man, that's an abstract American flag. But your experience has had to have shaped that. That's perception. It's what we're doing with the raw data inside of our own minds. All right. This is a good graphic, pretty much, for how sensation and perception work together. So we have information right here. So information, light, sound, heat, pressure, temperature, whatever it is, coming in. Okay, so 5 senses. So sensation, raw data, comes in through the eyes, ears, nose, skin, tongue, and then perception is the interpretation of the raw data within the brain and the spinal cord. So that's what's going on. I mean, we have all that stuff on the outside, and this is the first part of Unit 3, and then this is the last part of Unit 3. So we're going to cover this, and then we will see what we do with that information. All right, basic principles of sensation. We're accustomed to thinking of the senses as being quite different from one another. However, all of our senses involve some common processes. All sensation is a result of the stimulation of specialized cells called sensory receptors. Rods, cones, taste buds, your corpuscle, I think is what it is on the skin, by some form of energy or a stimulus outside, right? Some sort of physical energy is making you feel these things through the senses. So sensory receptors, specialized cells unique to each sense organ that respond to a particular form of sensory stimulation. And then an important term for us is transduction, the process by which a form of physical energy is converted into a coded neural signal that can be processed by the nervous system. Again, and I know this sounds weird, you've never seen anything or heard anything or anything like that, because what you truly are is your brain and your spinal cord. And your brain and your spinal cord only understands electrical impulses, neural impulses. So what we do is we change that physical energy, light waves, sound waves, heat, pressure, all that kind of stuff, and our brains transduce it, transduction, into an electrical impulse, and that is the language of our brain. That's the only thing our brain has ever done, ever experienced, is electricity and chemicals. So how would you describe this through the senses? Obviously, this is an apple. So if we just looked at it through vision, we could probably pick up its shape, would be round, the colors, that's what we would be able to really pick up with vision. Even this condensation on the apple, we really couldn't necessarily, when we see that it's wet, we're integrating, that information in with vision to our experience of what things could possibly be. So even that would be perception. Taste, if we just thought about this as taste, what does an apple taste like? I mean, this looks like a Honeycrisp maybe, maybe a Gala or a Fuji apple. I'm an apple guy. But probably a little bit sweet with a tiny bit of tartness. And then hearing, what does an apple sound like? It doesn't sound like much if you're just holding it, but if you bite into it, right, that crunch, that crack of the skin, or if you drop it and it hits that thud on the ground and then you just get sad because it's going to be bruised on one area later whenever you try to eat it. Touch. You're going to be able to feel the shape. You're going to be able to feel the condensation. You're going to feel the firmness of the apple. Okay, all of that would be through touch. And then smell. What does an apple smell like? Some people say it smells like dirt, which is funny. But I don't know, it smells a little sweet, Sweet smell and taste are closely, together. They work together a lot of the times. You hold your nose and you taste something. So if I held my nose and I bit into a raw onion, I might, and if I was blindfolded, I might think it was an apple. It has the same texture to it. All right, sensory threshold. So absolute threshold, the smallest possible strength of a stimulus that can be detected half the time. This is the smallest amount of energy needed to be detected half the time. A difference threshold is the smallest possible difference between two stimuli that can be detected half the time, also called the just noticeable difference. Please understand that the just noticeable difference and difference threshold, that right there is 100% the same thing. Those terms are interchangeable. Okay, so the smallest possible difference between two stimuli that can be detected half the time. We'll talk about that in a second. Weber's law, this guy right here, Ernst Weber, a principle of sensation that holds that the size of the just noticeable difference will vary depending on its relation to the strength of the original stimulus. That is developed by Ernst Weber. We'll talk about that here in a second as well. And then we have sensory adaptation, the decline in sensitivity to a constant stimulus. This is just getting used to constant physical energy. You know, the best example that I could possibly give you would be if you put on socks in the morning, you know, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you're not really thinking to yourself, man, I can still feel my socks. No, you've become desensitized to it, right? Sensory adaptation. You know, that pressure and that feeling of the sock doesn't mean much to you anymore because it's been constant. So, all right, absolute thresholds for the 5 senses. So, vision. A candle flame seen from 30 miles away on a clear, dark night. That is unbelievable. We're talking about the pinnacles of our superpowers here as a human. A candle flame seen from 30 miles away on a clear, dark night. You can see that. Okay? Hearing. The tick of a watch at 20 feet. 20 feet is quite a distance. Okay? But to hear a tick of a watch, the tiniest little mechanism from 20 feet away, you're able to do that. Now, you can't have any competing sounds, but you can do that. Taste, 1 teaspoon of sugar and 2 gallons of water. So you take 1 sugar cube, boom, drop it in 2 gallons of water, and you'll still be able to taste it. Anything else becomes diluted. Smell, 1 drop of perfume through a 3-room apartment. A 3-room apartment is really just a 1-bedroom apartment, so you've got the bedroom, the kitchen, and the living room. And 1 drop of perfume, you would be able to smell that in every single one of those rooms, as long as there's no competing smell. And then touch, a bee's wing falling on your cheek from the height of about a ½ inch. I have no idea how these people designed this experiment to figure this one out, but a bee's wing falling on your cheek from a height of about ½ inch? What? All right, difference thresholds. So the smallest difference between 2 stimuli that can be detected as a difference. For example, turning down stereo volume, you may hear a difference. Your sister with a different threshold may not. So let's say that you're in my car, we're going somewhere, I'm playing music, it's on level 25. I turn it down to level 22. I can tell a difference, but you, my passenger in my car, cannot tell the difference. That, you know, it needed to be turned down to 20 for you to hear the actual difference. Okay, so the difference threshold is, you know, the smallest difference between 2 stimuli that can be detected as a difference. And that threshold can be different for different people. So if you can hear the difference, it exceeds your threshold. If she can't, it hasn't exceeded hers. All right, Weber's law. The just noticeable difference, also called the difference threshold, is always large when stimulus intensity is high and small when stimulus intensity is low. For example, if the TV volume is high, you have to turn it down a lot to make the difference noticeable. I noticed this at my parents' house. My mom, hard of hearing in one ear. The volume's on like 70 when I walk in to pick up my kids. And I grab the remote, I start turning it down immediately. I can't tell a difference of the volume until I get below 40. It's all the same volume to me from 40 to 70. Okay? So Weber's law is saying that if the volume is high, you have to turn it down a lot to hear the difference, right? The difference, just noticeable difference, the difference threshold. On the opposite end, if a weightlifter adds 2 pounds to 10 pounds of weight, he'll notice a difference. Because 2 pounds is what? 1/5 of the weight of 10 pounds. If he adds 2 pounds to 100 pounds, he won't notice a difference. It would take 20 pounds to do that. So if the difference is great, you're going to have to change it a lot. If the difference isn't that great, it would. I know this is a little disturbing for most, but this is just for you to remember that this weightlifting analogy here. If a weightlifter adds 2 pounds to 10 pounds of weight, he'll notice a difference. If he adds 2 pounds to 100 pounds, he won't notice a difference because that's only 2% of the weight. Okay? Sensory adaptation occurs due to the loss of responsiveness in receptor cells after stimulation has remained unchanged for a while. Again, the best example here is socks on your feet. So when you put them on, you feel them, but then after a while, you don't feel them at all. Sensory adaptation examples: getting used to cold water, skin touching the desk you're sitting in right now, the fan in the room. Our nervous system pays more attention to changing stimuli than to constant stimuli, because that is the name of the game. Is it more beneficial for survival for a human to pay attention to constant stimuli or changing stimuli? The answer is changing stimuli. You actually want to pay attention to the things that are changing, because they could possibly, one of those changes, be a threat. Okay? All right, signal detection theory. So this is a little bit of perception with sensation here. Sensation is a judgment that the sensory system makes about incoming stimulation. So it's a combination of sensation and decision-making processes. So we have the stimulus event, so something in the outside world, some sort of physical energy. Neural activity, so what we've transduced our neural activity to experience inside of our brain. Comparison with personal standard. This is the perception part, right? What happened last time these neurons fired? And then action or no action. I have an example for this. It's pretty much, one night I was going to bed and my dogs were barking, and it was trash. The next morning was trash morning, so I assumed it was my neighbors taking their trash out, just as I had done 30 minutes before that. But I get in bed, dogs are barking. I tell them to calm down because it's just my neighbors moving their trash cans. And the next morning I wake up and I walk outside and my car door's open and my electric sunglasses and it's a brand, and my Beats headphones were stolen out of my car because my car was unlocked. My dogs were barking at the thief who had opened my car door, and the dogs had heard them going through the car. I had a stimulus event, right? I heard a noise as well, and I also heard the dogs barking. Neural activity said, oh, something's going on outside. Comparison with personal standard, oh, it's Wednesday night. Thursday is trash day, it must be my neighbors. And then action or no action, I chose no action. And then I woke up the next morning to see $300 worth of items stolen from my car. Sad times. When something goes bump in the night, you must decide what it is. What you decide depends on the keenness of your hearing, what you expect to hear, and as well as other background noises. Individual characteristics affect detection. So this is why parents can hear a baby crying in the middle of the night, because it is their job to take care of the baby, and they're looking for it or paying attention to that noise, while the siblings don't hear the baby at all and sleep straight through it. I see this all the time. I've got a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old. The 4-year-old never wakes up because the 1-year-old is crying. All right, science versus pseudoscience. Again, pseudoscience is false science. Subliminal perception. Subliminal perception, the detection of stimuli that are below the threshold of conscious awareness. It's unconscious perception. Now, advertisers try to do this, but they try it. It might work on some, and it might not work on others. There's a threshold for it. If it can evoke a brain response, everyone's threshold is a little bit different. They do have some effect, but if you're exposed to shapes subliminally and then forced to pick a shape afterwards, you might pick the shape shown to you subliminally. Bottom line is, it affects us briefly through attitudes, thoughts, preferences, and emotions. This right here, in 1957, a guy spliced 2 subliminal messages into a movie called Picnic. One message was thirsty, drink Coke, and the other was eat popcorn. Each message was shown every 6 seconds for 1/24th of a second. That is beyond the threshold of seeing or picking up for a human. Okay? So over a 6-week period, 45,000 people saw the movie. During that period, they claimed that Coke sales increased by 58% and popcorn by 18%. This is a disputed study. Check it out if you want to, but these are the findings from this study. The mere exposure effect, the finding that repeated exposure to a stimulus increases a person's preference for that stimulus. The example that I can give you here is walking down the hallway, possibly on a normal year. and you see somebody who you think might be a little bit threatening, maybe the way they're dressed or something like that. And then you see them every single day in the exact same hallway, and you're exposed to them every single day, and nothing ever happens, and you're just exposed and exposed and exposed to the same person. And what happens is, repeated exposure to a stimulus increases a person's preference for that stimulus. An example that I have here is, my best friend of all time, okay? He moves in, 4th grade, he sits next to me on the bus, and then he sits next to me at lunch for the entire year of 4th grade. I didn't like this guy. I remember when he came to my school, he sat next to me on the bus, and he said, "Man, this new school sucks." I said, "Don't say that around me." And he looked at me and he said, "Sucks, sucks, sucks." And we got a little tussle, all right? But then we were next to each other on the bus and the cafeteria for the rest of the year. And guess what? Mere exposure effect happens, and now he's still my best friend. All right, science versus pseudoscience, subliminal perception. Here's just a couple things. Self-hypnosis, self-help tapes, fall asleep. You start listening to these things. There's no real crazy proof that this works. All right, now let's get into the senses. We're going to cover 2 senses here today, vision and hearing, and then we'll cover the chemical senses next time, and then we'll get into perception. So here we go. Vision. The receptor cells for vision respond to the physical energy of light waves and are located in the retina of the eye. The sense organ for vision is the eye. That's pretty simple, right? So let's take a look. So what we see, the nature of light, this is actually what we see. What is hitting the back of our retina? Light waves. Specifically, visible light waves, right? So we are only capable of seeing a minuscule portion of the electromagnetic energy range. And that happens to be right here. Old Roy G. Biv. Wavelength, the distance from one wave peak to another, so from peak to trough. So from peak to trough, this would be the wavelength, right? Okay. So, how we see? So some definitions here. We have the cornea. The cornea is a clear membrane covering the visible part of the eye that helps gather and direct incoming light to the back of the retina. The pupil is the opening, all right, in the middle of the iris that changes size to let in different amounts of light. It's the black hole in the middle of your eye. A dilated pupil is bigger. A constricted pupil